First, we shipped a global attribute called popover, which I'm excited to announce just reached baseline newly available status a few weeks ago. Popover elements are hidden via display none until opened with an invoker. To create a basic popover, you would simply set the popover attribute on said popover and link its ID to a button with popover target. Now the button is the invoker which opens the popover. And this is all you need to create this basic popover. With the popover attribute now enabled, the browser handles many of those key behaviors that I just mentioned. This includes promotion to the top layer, which is a separate layer above the rest of the page, so you don't have to worry about handling Z indexes anymore. Light dismiss functionality, where clicking outside of the popover area will optionally close the popover and return focus. There's also default tab focus management, since opening the popover makes the next tab stop inside the popover, regardless of where it is on the page. It does not have to be a sibling to the element that's invoking it. I know, it's so hard to do this. We need to make it easier. It also has built-in keyboard bindings, where hitting the escape key will exit the popover, or double toggling will return focus and exit the popover. And finally, default component bindings, as the browser will semantically connect a popover to its trigger. So you get all of this with one attribute. All you need is the popover attribute, popover target, and an ID on your popover. No JavaScript required. It is important to note that popover does not have any inherent semantic meaning, so you still need to use the proper HTML structures and ARIA to provide more contextual meaning for what the popover element actually is. And additionally, popover does not inert the rest of the page. So that means that it does not make the rest of the page non-interactive. You can use it for menus, tooltips, and other elements. If you do want to focus trap and make the rest of the page non-interactive, you might want to use a dialog element, and you can do a lot of similar things with those two features. You might even be using the Popover API today without realizing it, because GitHub implemented Popover on their homepage for their new menu and in their pull request overview, progressively enhancing this feature today already and using a polyfill built by Oddbird with some significant support from GitHub's own Keith Circle to support older browsers. It's pretty awesome to see this in the wild and to see a team so dedicated to great UI, deeply invested in the success of this API. And it's clear why, as it's already had a huge impact for the GitHub team. They've been able to deprecate literally thousands of lines of code by migrating these components over to Popover. Additionally, they've benefited from the top layer management that Popover provides and the built-in accessibility relationships, making it significantly easier to build this complex pattern in the correct way. And when you have popovers, you'll likely want to add some interaction as well. And there are 4 new features that landed in the past year to support animating popovers. And these include the ability to animate display and content visibility on a keyframe timeline, the transition behavior property with the allow discrete keyword, which transitions discrete properties like display. It puts you in a new transition mode. The starting style rule to animate entry effects from display none and into the top layer, and the overlay property to control top layer behavior during an animation. These properties work for any element that you're animating into the top layer, whether it's a popover or a dialog, and altogether it looks like this for a dialog with a backdrop. First, you set up the starting style so that the browser knows what styles to animate this element into the DOM from. This is done for both the dialog and the backdrop. Then you style the open state for both the dialog and the backdrop. So for a dialog, this open state would be the open attribute. If you're doing this for a popover, it would be the popover open pseudo element. And finally, you animate the opacity, display, and overlay using the allow discrete keyword to enable the animation mode where discrete properties can transition. But Popover is just the start of the story. Today, I'm really excited to announce that support for native anchor positioning is now available in Chromium 125, which is landing in stable Chromium-based browsers today. Woo! This means with just a few lines of code, the browser can handle all the logic to tether two elements to each other. In this example, we have a simple tooltip being anchored to each of these buttons positioned at the bottom center. And this one is the same idea, combining popover, anchor, and CSS trigonometric functions to create this fun twirl open effect for this menu, anchoring this menu of options above the button that is invoking the menu, which is this plus sign. You can set up an anchor positioned relationship in CSS by using the anchor name property on the anchoring element, in this case the button, and the position anchor property on the positioned element, in this case the tooltip. And then you can apply absolute positioning or fixed positioning relative to the anchor using the anchor function. Here we're positioning the top of the tooltip, the positioned element, to the bottom of the anchor. Alternatively, you could use anchoring directly in the anchor function, like so, and skip the position anchor property altogether. This can come in handy when you're anchoring to multiple elements too. Finally, you can use the new anchor center keyword to justify and align properties and center the positioned element to its anchor. While it's very convenient to use anchor positioning with Popover, Popover is not a requirement of using anchor positioning. It works great with any two or more elements to create a visual relationship. In fact, this demo, inspired by an article from Roman Komarov, shows an underline style being anchored to these list items as you hover or tab over them. In this case, we're using the anchor function to set up the anchor position using the physical properties of left, right, and bottom. And when we hover over one of the links, the target anchor custom property changes, and the browser shifts the target to apply the positioning styles. We're also animating the color at the same time, creating this pretty neat effect using anchoring. In addition to the default directional absolute positioning that you've likely used before, there's a new layout mechanism that has landed as a part of the anchor positioning API called inset area. Inset area makes it easy to place anchor positioned elements relative to their respective anchors and works on a 9-cell grid with the anchoring element in the center. For example, inset area top places the element at the top, and inset area bottom does what you would expect it to do as well. With inset area, this can be simplified to this. You can combine these positional values with span keywords to start at the center position and span to the left, span to the right, or span to take up the full set of columns or rows that are available in this space. You may also want to use logical properties instead of directional keywords for inset area, which are also available as a part of this API. To make it easier to visualize and to pick up this layout mechanism, I built a tool at the following URL where you can explore these different position values and copy the code. And because these elements are anchored, the positioned element dynamically moves around the page as its anchor moves. So in this case, we have container query styled card elements, which resize based on their intrinsic size, something that you could not do with media queries. And the anchored element will shift to the new layout as the card UI changes. Menus and submenu navigation are so much easier to create with a combination of popover and anchor positioning. But what happens when you hit the edge of a viewport with your anchored element? Well, you can let the browser handle that for you too. You can do this in a few ways. The first is to create your own positioning rules. In this case, the submenu is initially positioned at the right of the storefront button with the code that's currently shown. But you can create a position try block for when there's not enough space to the right of the menu, and let's call that one bottom. Then you can connect that with position try options, explicitly calling it by name, like this. So now the browser will switch between these anchored states, trying the right position first and then shifting to the bottom. And the browser can do all of this with a nice transition as well. Along with the explicit positioning logic, there are a few keywords that the browser provides if you want some basic interactions, like flipping your anchor in the block or inline directions. For a simple flipping experience, you can take advantage of these flip keyword values, writing a position try definition, skipping the position try definition altogether. So now you can have a fully functional, location-responsive anchor positioned element with just a few lines of CSS. Pretty cool. We see these tethered experiences everywhere, and this set of features is an excellent start to unleashing creativity and better control over anchor-positioned elements and layered interfaces. But this is just the start. Currently, Popover only works with buttons as the invoking elements, or with JavaScript as the invoker. For something like these Wikipedia-style previews, a pattern seen all over the web platform, we have to make it possible to interact with, but also to trigger a popover from a link and from showing user interest, not necessarily clicking through, but doing something like a hover or a tab focus. So as a next step for the Popover API, we're working on Interest Target to solve these needs and to make it easier to recreate these experiences with the proper accessibility hooks built in. This is a really challenging accessibility problem to solve, with a lot of open questions around ideal behaviors. But solving this and normalizing this functionality at a platform level should improve these experiences for everyone. In addition to the Interest Target invoker, there's an additional future-facing general invoker currently available to test in Canary, thanks to the work of two third-party developers, Keith Circle and Luke Warlow, called Invoke Target. Invoke Target supports the declarative developer experience that Popover Target provides, but for all interactive elements, including dialogue, details, video, input type equals file, and more. We know that there are use cases that aren't covered yet by this API, like styling the arrow that connects an anchored element to its anchor, especially as the position of that anchor moves and shifts, or enabling an element to slide and to stay in the viewport instead of snap to another position when it reaches its bounding box. So while we're excited about this powerful API and about landing these features, we're also looking forward to expanding on its capabilities even more in the future.